Part 1. History of the United States Drafts. Revolutionary War. America has had a long history of using drafts to make their army stronger. This dates back to when America wasn't even a country. In colonial times, the American colonies used militia to defend their cities. The militia would be drafted for a one-year service in the Continental Army. This system was underused and ultimately failed, though it was the first American draft. During the Revolutionary War, the colonies would sometimes use a draft when they could not get the manpower needed from volunteers. Civil War. The Civil War had a similar, very basic draft system. This was implemented on both sides. One difference was that people could hire substitutes to take their position in the war if they were drafted. The Confederacy soldiers would also get time taken off their drafted amount if they caught freed slaves fighting for the Union Army. World War I. In 1917, Woodrow Wilson and his administration decided to use a primarily draftee-based military when only 73,000 people volunteered out of the expected million in the first 6 weeks of the war. They established the Selective Service Act of 1917. The act authorized a draft of all males between the ages of 18 and 45 and took away the ability of finding substitutes that was used in previous drafts.
The draft began in October 1940. By the summer of 1941, President Roosevelt proposed to the Congress to extend the term of duty beyond the length of a year. On August 12th, the United States House of Representatives approved the extension with one single vote. Here you see the American propaganda posters. These posters consisted of images and words that would persuade one to fight with America and join the army. Many of these images were very offensive to the American rivals. Here is a person, which is a Japanese monkey, attacking an American woman. Offensive images like those were used to put the images in the people's head that our rivals were very, very bad people, and we needed to find a way to stop them. Here are some World War II draft registration cards. These cards consisted of the name of the person applying for the draft, the age, birth date, birthplace, residence, employer information, name or address of person who would always know where the person who is applying for the draft is, and the physical description of the person applying for the draft. After Pearl Harbor, all men ages 18 to the age of 64 were required to be registered. The draft of World War II was huge. 50 million men from 18 to the age 45 were registered, 36 million classified, and 10 million inducted. Almost 52,000 men received CO status. Over 25,000 entered the military with non-combat rules, meaning they would not have to fight in war. Another 12,000 went to civilian work camps, and 6,000 went to prison. President Roosevelt's signing of the STSA in September 1940 began the first draft in the United States. Although the draft actually began in October, this was what led and started the drafts off. Without this, none of the draft would have happened. He also proposed things to increase training and equipment production to use in the war that had not been approved. After this act, as many up to 900,000 men could be in training at any time and limited service to 12 months. This was later increased to 18 months in 1941.
After World War II, the second peacetime draft began with the passage of the Selective Service Act of 1948. The new act required the registration of men from the ages of 18 to 26. This act also began a new system called the Doctor Draft, which was aimed at bringing medical professionals into the military. In 1951, Congress passed the Universal Military Training and Service Act of 1951 for the increased need of men in the Korean War. This act lowered the age of registered men and extended the service time to 2 years. While John F. Kennedy was president, he altered the way drafts of the time worked. While he was in office, he created an unwritten rule that moved registered men who had wives and children to the back of the list of draftees, and men who only had wives to the second-to-last spots. The men who were affected by this unofficial rule were known as the Kennedy husbands. While Richard Nixon was campaigning for presidency in 1968, one of his main points was that he was going to end the draft. There was opposition to this on both sides of the argument, so Nixon made the decision to not make a decision early into his presidency. This opened up an opportunity for an outside source to campaign for an all-volunteer system. The Gates Commission, led by Thomas Gates Jr., was established to work towards an all-volunteer military. In February 1970, the Gates Commission issued a report showing that the military would be just as strong without having a draft. In June of 1917, the active draft law was running out. The President Nixon and the Department of Defense had to make a decision on whether to stop the draft or keep it going. They ultimately decided that completely stopping the draft would be a bad decision, so they extended the current draft law by 2 years till 1973. December 1972 saw the last men drafted who were born in 1952 and who reported for duty in June of 1973. On February 2, 1972, there was a drawing held to determine the draft priority numbers for men born in 1953, but in early 1973, it was announced that no further draft orders would be issued. In March 1973, 1974, and 1975, the Selective Service assigned draft priority numbers for all men born in 1954, 1955, and 1956 in case the draft was extended, but it never was. The last drafted soldier retired from active duty in 2011.